Picture the classic image of Wall Street in your mind right now. You immediately think of fancy glass offices towering over the sprawling concrete jungle of the city. You imagine glowing Bloomberg terminals flashing green and red numbers across multiple screens in perfectly air-conditioned rooms. You picture those iconic dress shirts with contrasting collars worn by guys who look like they own the entire world and dictate the global economy before their morning coffee. This is widely considered the pinnacle of ambitious business. It looks like the ultimate dream for anyone who wants to conquer the financial world and build generational wealth. But let me tell you a secret right now. There is a very dark reality hiding behind that pristine glass. Behind that prestigious six-figure salary, those elite graduates are physically chained to ergonomic chairs for 100 hours a week. They are popping stimulants just to keep their heavy eyes open while the rest of the city sleeps. And the most heartbreaking part is that they do all of this just to have their meticulously calculated Excel margins tweaked by a vice president at 3 in the morning. Welcome to David Marshall Finance. I am Dave, and today we are going to completely tear down the shiny facade of the financial world. If you want to uncover the raw and unfiltered truth about money, economics, and the psychology behind wealth building, you absolutely need to hit that subscribe button right now. We do not hold anything back here. We expose the reality of the systems running our modern world. So what exactly is happening inside those massive skyscrapers that dominate the skyline? You see these towering monuments of extreme wealth in Manhattan, and you naturally assume that the people inside are moving billions of dollars in highly complex and secretive market trades. You assume they are absolute financial masterminds predicting the subtle movements of the global economy with perfect accuracy. But the reality of investment banking is something completely different from what you see in the movies. We need to clearly define what investment banking actually does on a high level so you can understand the game. At its fundamental core, this industry is not about predicting the stock market or picking winning stocks for retail investors. It is primarily about advising incredibly large corporations on how to get more money and grow even larger. They advise these massive global companies on raising debt from institutional lenders. They help them with selling shares to the public to raise fresh capital. They execute complex mergers and acquisitions when one corporate giant decides to swallow another corporate giant whole. And they handle the highly lucrative process of IPO underwriting. An IPO underwriting simply means they take a privately held company, figure out how much it is worth, and help it become a public company by pricing their initial shares and selling them to a network of institutional investors. But you might be wondering why these massive global corporations need these banks at all. Think about it for a second because it is a vital question. If a huge technology company wants to buy another huge technology company for $20 billion, they cannot just swipe a corporate credit card and call it a day. The logistics are incredibly complex. That is exactly where mergers and acquisitions come into play. Mergers and acquisitions, widely known as M&A, is the absolute bread and butter of Wall Street. Firms like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase act as the ultimate high-end real estate agents for these mega corporations. They broker the massive deals, they negotiate the incredibly complex financial terms, and they take a massive fee for putting the complicated puzzle pieces together. They are essentially the high-paid middlemen of the entire corporate universe. And yet, despite being merely middlemen, they somehow command an aura of absolute prestige and power. This brings us to the biggest and most dangerous trap in the modern educational system today. I call it the aimless ambitious trap, and it is destroying the youth. Every single year, the most elite universities in the world pump out incredibly smart and highly driven graduates. These young adults are the valedictorians of their high schools. They are absolute perfectionists who cannot stand the idea of failure. They are students who have spent their entire lives jumping through rigorous academic hoops and getting straight A's to please their parents and their professors. But when graduation rapidly approaches, a massive percentage of these brilliant young minds have absolutely no idea what they actually want to do with their lives. They have no specific passion driving them forward. They just know they want to be incredibly successful and wealthy. Wall Street knows this exact fact. Wall Street actually preys on this exact psychological vulnerability. The massive banks roll onto these prestigious college campuses in their expensive tailored suits and offer these students a very clear and highly structured path forward. They offer them a prestigious title that will impress their parents, a clear corporate hierarchy to climb, and most importantly, a starting salary that ranges from $150,000 to $200,000 in year one. It is effectively a high-paying parking lot for smart and aimless undergraduates. The logic of these young graduates is completely fascinating when you look at it through the strict lens of behavioral finance. They fall headfirst into the toxic trap of prestige chasing. They think to themselves, if you're going to be smart, young, and aimless, you might as well do it on a massive salary. It sounds completely rational on the surface level. Why struggle to figure out your true life passion for free when you can figure it out while making $200,000 a year in the most exciting city in the world? But this is a classic example of hyperbolic discounting. These ambitious kids are choosing the immediate, highly visible reward of a massive starting salary and undeniable social prestige, while completely discounting the devastating long-term psychological toll of the job. They want the immediate dopamine hit of telling their friends they work at JP Morgan Chase, ignoring the absolute misery awaiting them in the very near future. And once they get that first massive paycheck, they become immediate victims of lifestyle creep. They sign a lease on an overpriced luxury apartment in Manhattan, they start buying expensive clothes to fit in with their peers, and suddenly that $200,000 salary is barely enough to cover their new inflated standard of living. They are trapped by their own spending habits. But here's the major reveal that nobody ever tells them during those fancy catered campus recruiting dinners. That massive six-figure salary is not a reward for their Ivy League intellect. That money is strictly hazard pay. It is a calculated and deliberate purchase of their total time autonomy. Wall Street is not buying their unique brilliance or their creative problem-solving skills. Wall Street is buying their complete and utter submission to the firm. Let us dive deeply into the absolute misery of the entry-level squeeze so you can fully grasp what happens behind those glass walls. When a fresh, eager new graduate joins a prestigious firm like Morgan Stanley, they are immediately given the title of analyst. Now the word analyst sounds very strategic and highly analytical. It heavily implies that this person is going to be analyzing complex global market trends and making high-level financial predictions that move markets. The truth is much darker and far more depressing. The day-to-day life of an analyst is effectively high-end slide deck creation and basic repetitive financial modeling. They are permanently stuck in endless circles of middle management approvals that drain their soul. You have to understand the rigid hierarchy. There is a stark and painful difference between an analyst and an associate. The analyst is the absolute lowest person on the corporate totem pole. The associate is just one single step above them, usually someone who went back to school to get an MBA and is now managing the workflow. The associate delegates all the tedious work to the analyst. The analyst does the heavy lifting, the meticulous formatting, the mind-numbing late-night data entry, Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides, the glamorous tools of Wall Street. That is exactly what they actually do for a living. They do not trade stocks on the floor. They do not make massive investment decisions. They spend 80 to 100 hours a week making absolutely sure that the corporate logo on slide 42 is perfectly aligned with the text box, and that the specific font in row 60 of the financial Excel model perfectly matches the font in row 61. It is mind-numbing administrative work dressed up as elite high finance. This brings us directly to the severe psychological toll of the 100-hour workweek. Human beings are simply not biologically designed to sit under harsh fluorescent office lights for 100 hours, a single week completely staring at endless rows of spreadsheets. It entirely breaks the human spirit over time. The loss of time autonomy is absolute and unforgiving. When you work in investment banking, you literally do not own your weekends. You do not own your weekday evenings. You do not even own your national holidays. If a vice president decides to email you on Thanksgiving morning asking for a completely revised slide deck for a meeting that might not even happen, you silently open your laptop while your family eats turkey and you revise the slide deck without complaining. They trade their life for a paycheck, trapped in a gold-plated cage. To really understand how utterly absurd this ecosystem truly is, you have to hear the story about the 3 a.m. slide deck fiasco. This is a painful rite of passage for every single analyst on Wall Street. Let us imagine a brilliant young analyst named Harrison. Harrison was the absolute top of his finance class at a major Ivy League university. He is incredibly smart, highly driven, and extremely eager to impress his demanding bosses. On a random Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, his vice president suddenly walks over to his desk and casually tells him they need a massive pitch book completed for a crucial client meeting on Friday morning. A pitch book is basically a massive printed PowerPoint presentation used to convince a giant company to hire the bank for a multi-billion-dollar merger or a massive IPO underwriting deal. Harrison immediately cancels his dinner plans and begins working frantically. He pulls endless streams of historical financial data from the terminals. He builds incredibly complex valuation models in Excel using discounted cash flow analysis. He meticulously copies those data tables into PowerPoint. He perfectly aligns every single text box so nothing looks sloppy. Midnight quickly passes, 2 in the morning slowly passes, the office is dead silent. He is chugging his 4th strong coffee of the long night. He is completely exhausted. His eyes are physically burning from staring at the bright monitor, but he forcefully pushes through the pain because he desperately wants to deliver absolute perfection to his boss. Finally, at exactly 3 in the morning, after working a grueling 18 hours straight on a massive 100-slide deck, he proudly emails the final polished version to his managing director for a final review. The managing director just happens to be awake, casually reviewing his emails on his phone from his luxury home. Harrison waits nervously at his silent desk, his heart beating fast. Exactly 5 minutes later, the managing director replies to the email. The short message simply says, "Actually, we do not really need the valuation section for this introductory meeting. Just delete slides 20 through 80, make the cover page blue instead of white, and print it out." The managing director literally glanced at 18 hours of grueling, highly technical, brilliant financial work for exactly 2 seconds, and completely deleted the main section without a second thought. That precise moment permanently destroys the soul of the young analyst. But it also proves a massive point about the hidden reality of investment banking that nobody talks about. Entry-level banking is essentially a sales role. It is absolutely not a strategic one. That massive pitch book that Harrison spent all night building was never actually about the deep financial analysis. It was purely a theatrical prop. It was a physically heavy document deliberately designed to sit on a mahogany conference table simply to make the investment bank look incredibly smart, overly prepared, and worthy of a $20 million fee. Harrison was not acting as a financial genius predicting the future of the market. He was acting as a highly paid, sleep-deprived graphic designer producing colorful marketing materials for a very expensive corporate sales pitch. This endless slide deck iteration loop happens every single day across every major firm on Wall Street. It actively creates a toxic environment of intense burnout and psychological fatigue. This is exactly why absolutely everyone in the industry constantly talks about exit opportunities. Almost nobody actually wants to stay an analyst forever. The entire overarching goal of working 100 hours a week is to somehow endure the pure misery for 2 grueling years, collect the massive year-end bonus, and then carefully leverage that prestigious Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan Chase logo on their resume to get a much better, slightly more humane job in private equity or corporate strategy at a massive tech company. They essentially treat the job like a highly paid prison sentence that guarantees them a vastly better life once they are finally paroled. But right now, at this exact moment in history, the entire landscape of Wall Street is shifting violently beneath their feet. The industry is currently facing a massive, unprecedented identity crisis. The golden era of endless corporate dealmaking and guaranteed massive bonuses is under severe threat from multiple different angles. We are currently witnessing the devastating impact of the interest rate squeeze. You have to understand that for over a decade, global interest rates were essentially held at zero by the central banks. Money was completely free to borrow. When money is completely free, aggressive corporations happily borrow billions of dollars just to buy other corporations and expand their empires. Massive technology companies decide to go public even if they are losing massive amounts of money every quarter. Mergers and acquisitions happen constantly because the overall cost of capital is incredibly cheap and everyone wants to make a deal. When all these deals are happening, the investment bankers are making absolutely massive fees just for facilitating the transactions. But when massive inflation hit the global economy and the Federal Reserve aggressively raised interest rates to fight it, the fundamental cost of borrowing money skyrocketed almost overnight. High rates have completely choked off corporate dealmaking across the board. Suddenly, borrowing $10 billion to buy a rival competitor is no longer a profitable strategy because the interest payments on that massive debt would completely bankrupt the acquiring company. Because of this, companies have completely stopped doing deals. And when companies stop doing deals, the investment banks completely stop making those massive advisory fees. This sudden, brutal freeze in the capital markets has triggered massive industry layoffs across every major firm. The shiny gold-plated cage is suddenly evicting its prisoners out onto the cold street. But the interest rate squeeze is really only the first part of this massive industry identity crisis. The second massive threat wiping out these prestigious jobs is the automation squeeze. Remember Harrison, our completely exhausted analyst working until 3 in the morning perfectly aligning corporate logos on a PowerPoint presentation. His specific job is in extreme danger right now. Basic repetitive analyst tasks like complex Excel modeling, tedious slide formatting, and endless data scraping are rapidly being automated away by advanced artificial intelligence and sophisticated Python software scripts. What used to take a brilliant analyst 12 painful hours to manually compile and format can now be instantly generated by a sophisticated language model in about 12 seconds. The massive banks are quickly realizing they do not actually need an expensive army of 22-year-olds making $200,000 a year just to format presentations and update financial models. The glamorous tools of Wall Street are rapidly being handed over to machines that never sleep, never complain, and never ask for a massive year-end bonus. And if that rapidly advancing automation was not enough to scare the industry, traditional investment banking is currently facing an absolute existential threat from completely new competitors who are rewriting the rules of finance. This is the brutal private equity competition. For many decades, traditional firms like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs held a strict, unbreakable monopoly on raising massive amounts of money for large companies. If a company needed capital, they had to go to the bank. But now massive alternative asset managers are aggressively stepping into their highly profitable territory. Financial giants like KKR, Blackstone, and Apollo are quietly building their own internal capital markets. They are no longer just buying private companies to flip them for a profit. They are now lending massive amounts of money directly to companies. This is a massive, industry-defining shift known as private credit. When a massive company desperately needs $1 billion to fund an expansion, they used to have to go to a traditional investment bank, pay them massive advisory fees, and go through a very public, heavily regulated, and incredibly slow syndication process. Now the executives of that company can literally just walk into the luxurious offices of Apollo or Blackstone and secure $1 billion loan directly from their massive private credit funds in a fraction of the time. These private equity giants are aggressively stealing lucrative deal flow straight from the traditional banks. They are significantly faster in their execution, they are far more flexible with their loan terms, and they are completely bypassing the traditional Wall Street middlemen, leaving the investment banks fighting over the scraps. We are also seeing massive companies completely bypass the banks when it comes to the process of going public. Historically, if your successful private company wanted to become a public company traded on the stock exchange, you had absolutely no choice but to pay an investment bank hundreds of millions of dollars in underwriting fees for IPO underwriting. The bank would take their massive cut just for introducing you to investors. But recently, massive, highly successful companies have realized they can just list their shares directly on the stock exchange without the bank. This aggressive strategy is known as a direct listing. Think about massive household technology companies like Spotify. They looked at the massive fees the banks were demanding and completely bypassed the traditional IPO underwriting process. They flat out refused to pay the Wall Street toll. They did not need a traditional bank to take them on a massive, expensive global roadshow just to sell their shares to institutional investors. They just listed their shares directly onto the public market, saving an absolute fortune in unnecessary fees, and clearly proving to the rest of the corporate world that the traditional investment banking model might not be as essential as it used to be. The entire foundation of Wall Street dominance is cracking under the pressure of innovation and efficiency. This exact phenomenon triggers a massive psychological crisis for the workers in the industry. It is a severe case of reset syndrome. These high-achieving analysts and associates spent their entire youth believing that if they just suffered enough, if they just worked hard enough, they would eventually reach a permanent state of wealth and security. But the rules of the game have been completely reset by artificial intelligence, high interest rates, and private credit. The finish line they were aggressively sprinting towards has been abruptly moved, leaving them completely exhausted and deeply unfulfilled. So what does this massive structural shift all mean for the future of the ambitious young graduate currently sitting in a university library dreaming of Wall Street glory? It means the fundamental game has completely changed. If you are going to be smart, young, and aimless, you might as well do it on a massive salary, but you have to completely realize that the massive salary is no longer guaranteed, and the job security is a complete illusion. The highly coveted exit opportunities are rapidly shrinking as the broader financial industry consolidates. The brutal 100-hour workweeks are becoming much less about closing massive, history-making financial deals, and much more about desperately clinging to a job that is slowly being automated away by a machine or outsourced by the aggressive private credit giants. The specific people who actually succeed in this chaotic modern environment are absolutely not the ones who blindly chase pure prestige for the sake of their parents' approval. The specific people who truly win the game of wealth are the ones who deeply understand the actual underlying mechanics of the financial system and absolutely refuse to let the brutal system consume their soul. You have to look far past the fancy glass offices and the glowing Bloomberg terminals. You have to clearly recognize that the iconic dress shirts with contrasting collars are just fancy uniforms for highly paid factory workers who are merely producing digital slide decks instead of physical goods. They trade their life for a paycheck, trapped in a gold-plated cage. Do not ever let that be your personal story. You have to aggressively build real, tangible, highly valuable skills that cannot simply be automated by a machine learning algorithm or easily replaced by a massive private equity firm lending out billions of dollars. You have to deeply understand the global macroeconomic trends, the sudden shift in federal interest rates, and the rapid evolution of modern capital markets, so you can successfully navigate your own financial journey without relying on the completely false promises of an outdated prestige machine. This brings me directly to the core underlying belief we hold here at David Marshall Finance. I call it the oxygen philosophy. Pay very close attention because this will change your life. Money is exactly like oxygen. You absolutely need enough of it to breathe comfortably, to survive in this economy, to keep the lights on in your house, and to genuinely feel secure in your daily environment. Without enough oxygen, you will panic, you will suffocate, and you will suffer immensely. But once your lungs are completely full of air, aggressively breathing in more oxygen does not make you any healthier. It does not make you any happier. It just makes you hyperventilate until you pass out. The ambitious people working 100 hours a week on Wall Street are completely hyperventilating. They already have enough oxygen to easily survive 10 lifetimes in luxury, but they are still desperately gasping for air because they completely forgot how to actually live a meaningful life outside of a spreadsheet. Do not ever spend your entire existence aggressively accumulating excess oxygen that you will never actually have the free time to stop and breathe. Secure your personal finances, deeply understand the financial system, and then go actually live your life entirely on your own terms. If you want to keep exposing the hidden truth behind the global financial systems and learn how to masterfully navigate your own wealth journey, make absolutely sure you are subscribed to the channel right now. We have so much more deep financial knowledge to uncover together. See you in the next video.